Welcome to the Whiskey, Jazz, and Leadership Podcast. Subscribe now so you don't miss a drop of straight talk you can't get anywhere else. We discuss the whiskeys to drink, music to listen to, and what it really takes to be an effective leader. I'm your host, Galen Bingham, the leadership strategist. Tonight's guest, global diversity professional and TEDx keynote speaker, Carole Copeland-Thomas. Hey, what you drinking? Yeah. Oh my. Because there's real power in everyone feeling like that this is part, that the success of the organization is part, that they have part ownership in the success of the organization. And if I don't feel like I belong, then how am I going to feel like I have ownership in the success of the organization? And that's where it becomes a leadership issue.
And just to speak to what you're just talking about there, when you look at young people as they graduate from high school or college, particularly the BIPOC community, Black, Indigenous people of color, and they are recruited in a very sophisticated, process-oriented way into organizations. You know, you have an HR team, you have a recruitment team, and they have the mechanisms and the process in place to recruit young, let's say, Black kids from historically Black colleges and universities. Yes, you can have success in that area, but if you don't pay the same amount of attention in terms of how that young Black person, in this case, is going to feel comfortable in that organization and see themselves moving up the ladder in that organization, then you have failed already because you've done half your job. And I'm speaking now to HR individuals where they spend a lot of emphasis on let's get them in, let's recruit them, let's go, let's have an exhibit table or whatever. But then you don't spend any time in your organization to deal with some of the retention issues, the social dynamics, helping these young kids to know where they can go to the beauty shop, the hair salon, or the barber shop, or where they can go to church. If you don't understand how important that is, you've already failed.
And you're going to end up spending more money trying to recruit another person
who will
to
stay about
backfill them.
18 months and then leave because they don't like the city, the organization. They didn't feel like they belonged, and then they move on elsewhere. This is the great failure of diversity from the point of view of retention. And I think the failure rate is very high, if I must be honest, because I hear the comments, I know what people are saying, I know, and then I see those who stay in organizations for whatever reason, and they're miserable. They're absolutely miserable because there has not been that right connection at the beginning in order to help them to feel like they belong and they can succeed within the rank and file of whatever company or organization they're in.
And, you know, gosh, there's so much more I want to talk with you about, because that goes back to my general management perspective. You know, everything that we're doing in business is about trying to maximize return on investment. And if I've made the investment to bring you in and I'm not getting your best, you don't feel comfortable giving me your best. There are things in the organization that make it an extra burden for you to think about giving me your best. I am failing to maximize my return on the investment to bring you in. Oh my gosh, that's where all this fits for me.
And also, again, just not jumping on HR, but HR has such a huge responsibility with organizations, particularly those that you've been a part of and the role that you've played. If the HR leaders don't have the courage to face some of these issues that particularly their Black and brown and Asian and indigenous staff members are facing, if they don't have the courage to receive the complaints and the information and do something about them, then they become a part of the problem. And I've seen that also, where you have HR individuals who are company people. All they're concerned about is representing the company and keeping their job and not necessarily teasing out the best of the employees and figuring out ways where things can be done better based on the issues that they face.
Oh my gosh. A book that I have really come to enjoy that speaks about a lot of this for me, or at least this is where I was exposed to the math behind this. It's called The Inclusion Dividend by Mason Donovan and Mark Kaplan, where he talks about you can calculate the dividend difference, the differentiated difference between those organizations that invest in inclusion versus those who don't. And there's math behind this. This isn't just theory. It really doesn't matter what Galen thinks, or even with Carole Copeland-Thomas's experience. At the end of the day, it doesn't really matter what she says. There's math that bears this out. And there's math as it pertains to the dividend and the profitability of these corporations. But again, we've jumped right in. And I want to back us up just a little bit, because I ask each of my guests to help me describe and explain the name of this podcast. Because I like all three literally. I like whiskey. I think I'm up to like 85 bottles now, and 82 of those bad boys are open. There are only three that I'm keeping for. I don't know what I'm keeping them for: wedding and just like extra special occasions. But all the others are open. So I like I like whiskey literally. I also like the metaphor. The metaphor of whiskey for me is doing what you enjoy with the folks you enjoyed with, irregardless of what those others might have to say about it. The others, meaning they're not part of your crew anyway. They can hate it, they can love it, but if they're not part of your crew, it really doesn't matter a whole lot. It's finding your folks, finding your crew, and doing what you enjoy with your crew. That, for me, is the metaphor of whiskey. The metaphor of jazz is how do you get from where you are to where you need to be, even in situations where sheet music is either not available, or the sheet music just isn't going to cut it. I've got to improvise. I've got to adapt. I've got to overcome. I've got to figure some things out to get from where I am to where I need to be, because the sheet music, the instructions, the guidebook just isn't going to make it happen. So for me, that's the metaphor of jazz. And then the metaphor of leadership is, marketing is important, strategy critical, but at the end of the day, someone needs to stand up and say, we're going to take this step starting right now. If no one stands up and calls that leadership action, then we're just going to be sitting around talking about it. And so that's kind of how this metaphor fits with me. But that's me. That's how it works in my head. How does that metaphor or this idea of whiskey, jazz, and leadership fit with how you see the world, and how you've been able to be as successful as you are?
I'll use my own examples, and I'll start with my sangria example. I look at sangria as I look at just the peace and the comfort of traveling, of fulfilling and exercising the ability to enjoy life with my family and do it in a way that brings a lot of joy and satisfaction to me. Case in point, last summer, I was very fortunate and just excited to be able to afford to take my whole family, with my son in law's exception. He did not come with us, on a family cruise. And it started off here in Boston, where I live. And we jumped on a Norwegian cruise line ship, the Pearl, and traveled to Bermuda. It was so satisfying. Clearly, being with my family, my daughters, my granddaughters, who are teenagers now, 16 and 13. They were what, 15 and 12 at that time. But just to hang out with them and just have fun and drink sangria and just enjoy myself, but then to have a level of reflection that I've gotten to this point And I'm just happy to have gotten to this point. And I say that because I just mentioned my brother is an attorney. He had had this kind of experience years earlier. He's pretty successful. So he had taken his family on multiple cruises on his birthday, etc. This was my first time to be able to do that.
Mm.
And then get to Bermuda, meet up with a wonderful friend and her husband, and they had a whole my granddaughter said, we want to get to Bermuda, we want to meet Bermudians, and we want to have authentic Bermuda food, which they were able to have and do. So this wonderful couple on the island, their husband as a minister was a presiding elder. In my denomination, the AME Church, we have a number of AME churches in Bermuda. They literally just put the spread out for us and just had wonderful food and a lot of Bermudian food. And it was just such a sense of satisfaction. So I look at as you look at your experiences in terms of whiskey, to me, that's my sangria moment. That's where everything all comes together and you do it in the company of people you love and people you know. The jazz component is how I live. That's it. And I say that because I'm a music major. My undergraduate degree is in music. So when I look at jazz, doo wop, doo wop, doo wop, doo wop, and just all of the things that have to be said and inflected musically so that aren't written on the page, that's the innovation and the creativity and the, oh, I need to raise another 2K, $2,000 so I can get from A to B. How am I going to do that? And then you figure out the system and the process that's going to be done. And you find out, yes, that it is possible and you've done it. So for me, innovation and creativity, the musicality of things, the alliteration that can be used, all of that represents the jazz that I put forth every day as a social entrepreneur and someone who continues to have to reinvent herself in order to stay relevant and recognizable and comprehensive in a very competitive market space. The leadership piece, I look at a leader who made that pledge in the summer of 2020 and has defied the board of directors or the naysayers in the company and has said, no, we said this then, and we are sticking to our guns, and we are going to absolutely embrace, commit ourselves, and continue to expand on the diversity platform. Um, I'm looking at my online course to help those leaders to fulfill those particular goals. I'm looking for companies and organizations who are bold and audacious in their brilliance and their excellence, and leaders who are putting forth that effort that's just not window dressing, but real efforts where they really want to move their companies forward because A, it's the right thing to do, but B, because it makes you profitable. It just becomes the kind of mechanism where you can be a standout success. The productivity is also a success because ultimately this is all a business case for why this makes sense and why it's relevant in today's companies and organizations. So that's my whiskey, jazz, and leadership answer, metaphorically so.
Oh my gosh. And such I mean, I can see all of that in your life. I mean, just I've known of you for about 4 or 5 years. We've gotten to know each other, I think, a little bit more intimately over the past year and a half to 2 years. And just everything that I've seen you do, all the moves I've seen you make, you have really stepped into this sangria uh, jazz and leadership metaphor. One quick story I'd love for you to share. You shared with me about when you were on this trip around the world, and you ended up, I don't know where you were, but you looked around and your ID and your money and your wallet was stolen, and you had to figure out how to get from In another country, you had to figure out how to get back home without any ID. Talk a little bit about that story, because that for me, when I heard that, that drove home the fact that I needed to have you on this show.
That's my missing stolen passports story. My podcast, Conversations with Carole, which people can pull up on their local podcast platform. It's actually number 16. I think that is the episode number. And that's my dream trip to the Middle East and to the Mediterranean area via a cruise ship. I have a goal of getting to at least 75 countries in my lifetime. And the best way to do that, the most efficient way, would be on cruise ships. And that's what I'm doing. I'm cruising around the world. So this was one of my cruise adventures last year, and was scheduled to start off in Athens, Greece, and then end up, we went to Egypt and Turkey and other places. It was 4 or 5 countries we were visiting. We were supposed to go to Israel, but obviously the war and the horrific situation that took place on October 7th prevented us from going to Israel. But I got to Athens and was at the airport and was going to my Airbnb. The cruise ship was leaving from Athens. I decided to save a little money. That was my first mistake. And I jumped on the public train system because right next to the airport, got all my information, knew where I was going to get off. Did not know that the trains were very crowded at the time of day that I was leaving. B, at the airport, as I was switching things around in my bag, people were watching what I was doing, and they watched me take my passport, put it into a little folder in my backpack behind me that anyone could unzip, which they did on the train that I was on. A ring that operates in that particular part of the world saw what I had done. They literally, without my knowledge, very crowded train, came, stood next to me, stood behind me, unzipped my bag, took just that gray packet, and went on their merry way, leaving me without a passport and $500 shorter. Thank God they did not take my credit cards, and I had money in other denominations that also was not taken. So that's what saved me and allowed me to continue on the trip. Make a long story short, I could not leave on the ship at that time. I had to stay over the weekend in Athens. I decided, stuff happens. There's nothing I can do about this. I might as well enjoy it as much as I can. So I went on my excursion, went to the Parthenon, and had a relatively decent time. Checked out of one Airbnb, went to another Airbnb that was cheaper but nicer. Went to the American Embassy, met a friend there. There were like 5 or 6 of us. Same thing had happened to us in terms of passports, etc. I found out, Galen, that airport and that train system, that is the number 3 place of pickpocketing and stolen items in the world. In the world. But I did catch up to the ship in Alexandria, Egypt. I flew from Athens to Egypt on the Monday of me getting my emergency passport at the American Embassy. And I caught up with the ship in Egypt and then continued on. So I missed the pyramids, but I did make the National Museum in Alexandria and continued on with the rest of my cruise. But yeah, I have lots of tips and suggestions. So again, that's episode 16 with Conversations with Carole. And yeah, that was
Ah.
that was a heck of an experience.
And I admire too the fact that you said, okay, that happened. How can I enjoy this anyway? Because it would be so tempting to have that diminish your entire vacation, and that you didn't allow that to happen.
No,
And
and
I
and
just
and
admire
fortunately
that.
for me, I was traveling I'm a solo traveler, so I was traveling alone, and so this happened to me alone. And again, the grace of it all was that they didn't get all my money, and they did not get my credit card, so that allowed me to continue on. Visit 2 Athens police departments. They were not helpful at all because they know these rings operate. But yeah, it's just, again, Galen, you got to make choices. I could have chosen to fly home. I did. I wanted to be on this trip. I wanted to have a good time. I know how to take care of myself in most instances as a divorced woman and a business leader, etc. So I knew I had to stand on my own 2 feet and deal with this. And it's so interesting because when I got home, I didn't tell my family until I got home. I didn't want because they would have worried and ordered me to come home. Um, and when I told my brother this, he had had a bout of COVID at that time. That COVID, he had ended up in the hospital the same time that I was being robbed and had blood clots that had formed because of COVID that could have killed him. And fortunately, he was, he recovered and was okay. But I told him, he told me his story. Then I told him my story. He pretty much he swore and said, "Man, you you know." But he in the end he said, "Job well done. You handled that well. Well done. Well done."
Fantastic, fantastic. And our time is running so fast, but I want to talk to you too about your invisible board of directors, because you and I connected around the Think and Grow Rich mastermind. And one of the concepts that Napoleon Hill talks about is his board of invisible counselors. And so I've just changed it a little bit and called it my invisible board of directors. Who are some of the people who are on your invisible board and why?
The person who stands out is the late Juanita Abernathy, the widow of, at that time, the widow of Ralph David Abernathy, the closest associate to Dr. King. I went to school in Atlanta, went to a PWI, Emory University. I married at that time. My former husband, we're divorced now, but he was a seminary student in the Interdenominational Theological Center, which were the HBCUs in the area, Morehouse, Atlanta University, et cetera. That was their seminary. He was a student there. I was a student at Emory. We married. And during that time, I wanted to make some extra money and became a Mary Kay consultant. So, to make a long story short, I was recruited by the then early Black directors, Ruel Cohn, who was a minister's wife also. Her husband was Cecil Cohn, and you may not know these names, but they're important because Cecil and his brother, they were great theologians in the Black church, academicians, etc. James Cohn was his brother, celebrated professor at Union Theological Center, I believe, written quite book. Well, anyway, um, Cecil Cohn's wife was my Mary Kay consultant. So I had the privilege back in the 70s to be around these wonderful, powerful Black women, many of them ministers' wives, and I was, a minister's wife at that time. And one of the members of our group was Juanita Abernathy. And so we just hooked and bonded and connected. My former husband became a close friend of her husband. They were both members of Kappa Alpha Psi. And so that was the bond for them. Miguel, and I think you're Kappa?
Yo, absolutely, absolutely.
My dad was a Kappa. My brother is a Kappa. My ex-husband is a Kappa. So, Kappas are quite prominent in my family. But my point is, I saw greatness from that level. I was in this bubble with these wonderful Black figures, these celebrated Black figures, where the smoldering embers of the civil rights movement just were still in place. And those were my friends. Those were people I hung out with. And Juanita became my big sister for the rest of her life. I spoke at her funeral. I sat behind John Lewis and Andrew Young, and just, the place was just loaded with individuals like that. But they were people I knew. And so that's why, what I am doing now, this is why Juanita is she was just a great friend and remained a great friend. I want younger people to know this history and know why this is so important and know the humanity of these individuals and why they need to capture their spirit in what they do so that as they move forward and have problems and obstacles and have people who talk about DEI and anti-woke this and all that stuff, that they can counter those kind of comments by the struggles and the fortitude of the Juanita Abernathys of the world, she was my friend, and my children embraced her. And my granddaughter now, earlier this year, gave the MLK speech in her town and referenced Juanita Abernathy from her perspective.
Oh man, what a great story. What a great conversation. I'm so excited to have you share on this platform, because this really does, as I identified about a year ago, you really do embody this whole idea of whiskey, jazz, and leadership from your own perspective, but just the thought that of what I believe goes into being successful in any field. You have just demonstrated that time and time again. So as we close, I'd love for you to share. You talked about your podcast. Talk about your podcast. Talk about how people can get a hold of you if they want to get this experience, the experience that I've been able to count as being an honor. If they want to have that for themselves, how can they get a hold of you?
Well, first of all, you can go to Conversations with Carole and you can listen to the interview I did with Galen Bingham several months ago and learn about his wisdom. So I'm super excited that now I'm on his podcast. That's fun. You can simply go to my name, CaroleCopelandThomas.com. That's Carole with an E, CopelandThomas.com. That's my main website. Learn more about my speaking services, the work that I do in diversity. We have several virtual events that I conduct throughout the year with the Multicultural Symposium Series and the US-UK Summit on Race. Another website that I operate is mssconnect.com, and that houses the events we have and talks about the collaborative efforts that I'm a part of. And then mssglobalsummit.com is the website for my members of the Multicultural Symposium Series. So a couple of ways to get a hold of me. I've Googled myself. So if you put CaroleCopelandThomas.com in Google, in the search engine, my name and a whole lot of other stuff will come up.
Fantastic. Well, this has been an amazing conversation, as is every conversation I have with you. I'm just so glad that we're able to capture this one on whiskey, jazz, and leadership. So raise your glass. I'm gonna raise my I.W. Harper, and again, I mean, this is the case with my last conversation. I have forgotten how good this actually is. I'm gonna need to move this back into rotation because this is really, really good juice. I.W. Harper, 15-year. And I am, again, just so honored to be able to count you as a friend and colleague. And I hope that when I show up and I start talking about DE&I, that I am doing some justice to the work that, quite honestly, you played a role in building. So I really appreciate that. So with that, if you've got a few more minutes, I'd love to bring you into the VIP room so that we can just continue this conversation, because my VIPs, these are the folks that are really going to be hankering for some of your insights, because they are the ones really, really trying to move their organization. So you got a few minutes. I'd love to bring you into the VIP room.
I'll be happy to. Thank you so much, Galen.
All right. Raise your glass. Cheers.
Cheers.
Hey, it's not too late. Hit that subscribe button so you're sure to catch the next episode. If you're really enjoying the vibe, leave us a review or become a VIP for guest and show exclusives. Cheers.